Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick with Herbal411.com, and I wanted to talk about or have a rant on sleep. That's one of the major things or levers that you can pull on in case you have to, or you're off balance as far as lifestyle. And that typically doesn't become noticeable until you get to like 30 to 50 years of age, and then suddenly you will come upon this epiphany where it's like you wake up every morning, it's like, I am so tired. Or your usual caffeine that you rely on doesn't work anymore, or your usual alcohol that you rely on to sleep doesn't work anymore. And then you go to the doctor's office and they say, well, you need some sleep, so stop this, stop that, and do exercise. Yeah, that doesn't really help. I mean, it gives guidance, but I think you have to fine-tune that guidance, and that's what I wanted to do with my patients. If you're not a patient of Herbal 411, then you probably should turn off and find somebody else's video. If you are one of my patients, then thank you for listening in. Thank you for coming to the conference. Great questions and great presenters at the last Ignite Your Life conference. The idea with sleep is that it's necessary, and it can be broken down into stages, which is why I wanted to do this rant. Because if you can, and I'll be doing a video on wearable devices. That's why I have my Garmin on and my Apple Watch. Wearable devices can help you fine-tune a couple things, but you have to be careful because they can also make you a slave to the wearable device. So please consider subscribing to my channel because the next video will be dovetailing onto this. The idea with restoration or restorative sleep is to allow the brain to do what it has to do. And this mechanism up here, this brain, can repair itself. And if it repairs itself properly, it will get you to maybe even live past the average human age or American age of 78. It might get you to last even longer than that. It should. Granted that you don't get into a car accident or have something catastrophic occur, like COVID. But the idea would be, just like muscle, if you exercise muscle, it grows and it functions better. It acts as a repository for glucose and cholesterol, and it moves you and you stay independent. Well, the same thing happens with the brain, but it's a little bit more complicated. So I'll have to discuss a couple of things, and hopefully you can follow along. But the physiology of the way the brain works during sleep, just think of it this way. Brain tissue is mostly insulated electrical wires, and there's an impulse at the beginning of the electrical wire, and it propagates to the end of the electrical wire, just like you plugging in your toaster and then the toaster works. But if you unplug the toaster, or if you cut the cord to the toaster, it doesn't work anymore, right? So there's billions of neurons in the brain, and they all have different connections. And then those connections have different connections. To get an idea, like me to move my hand like this, I have to initiate an idea, the frontal brain. It goes to the motor part, sending a message, electric signal to a different part of the brain, the motor part, which is usually the sides here. And then the motor part says, oh, frontal brain sent me a message, 3 impulses. That means lift the arm up. So the motor part sends a message down the neck into the hand saying move. And that's kind of the way it works. As far as movement, that can also happen with ideas, calculus, figuring out a test answer. You present the idea to the frontal, it goes into the depths of the hippocampus and memory. It then says, oh, I know this old formula. It's over here in the other part of the brain, and it connects to that part, and then the answer goes to the frontal brain again. And then you implement an answer on your form or on your test. And then that's the way the cognitive part of the brain works. So you have motor, you have cognitive, then you have emotion. So the brain can also not only send electrical impulses from one side to the other to result in an answer, a movement, but it can also present a mood and an overall sense of well-being or overall sense of sadness. So it depends on which of those hormones that are available. And so the brain and its tissue, neurological tissue, sends impulses with electricity using a sodium-potassium pump. I'm not going to get into that detail, but just trust me, there's a little bit of electric charge that goes from one spot to the next. And it can also send hormone. That same nerve tissue, it actually can secrete hormones, serotonin, norepinephrine, oxytocin, dopamine. So those are really important hormones that you probably heard about. And if the neurons or all these nerves up here, the brain tissue in total, is working perfectly, then number one, you wake up totally refreshed. Number two, you clean all the crappy things or connections that were not meaningful from the previous day. Let me explain that. If you give the brain challenges during the day, then at night is when the surveillance system in the brain will actually get rid of stuff that's not meaningful. The brain can actually take certain pathways or connections that it formed, like for calculus, and it can later on that night store that, especially if you repetitively do the same thing. It'll store it saying, hey, that was something he did or he calculated, or it was meaningful because there's a lot of serotonin with that one, that connection. So the brain will say, remember that, and it'll burn a tract so that you can have that same response in an impulse. For example, this is the rosary. And I hated doing this when I was a kid because it would take so long. It would seem like forever with my mom and dad being on the steps, a family gathering every night. It's like, oh, this is taking. So the thing with the rosary is you repeat pretty much the Hail Mary and the Our Father around all these beads. There's 150 of these things. So after a while, it will become commonplace because the brain will remember, oh yeah, you did that same prayer and you did it in sequence and it happened at this time of night. So eventually, you don't have to bring the cards out, you just actually remember the thing. And why I'm bringing this up is that I hated that when I was a kid, but here I am going back to it, and I can just immediately pull out the technique from the cobwebs of my brain and remember, oh yeah, that's what Mom used to teach us. It just came back because that memory channel or that connection was pulled out and put in the front has, this is important. So the brain in the middle of the night when you're sleeping can keep that one. And then for something like, oh, Netflix, you see food is a jingle that you hear about, and the brain has to get rid of that one because that memory is not important. Or that I saw a plane pass overhead and there was some smoke. That's not important either, so the brain got rid of that one. The beauty of what happens during proper sleep, and that typically happens in the beginning of sleep. So if you have, an average human should get 8 hours. I know if you're in college, you've probably done all-nighters or gotten by with 3 hours. Or if you're a parent and your kid's sick, you just power through and not even sleep. You will have to make that up eventually. So those of you who are in college and you push the envelope, if you did it for exams, you can make it up the weekend because the brain will ask for the debt back. You will have to pay that back as far as stages of sleep, slow wave sleep, which is non-REM, or REM. So let's break it down into that. If you have an average of 8 hours, which all the data says that an average human should have around 8 hours of sleep, more if you're a cancer survivor, if you're really pushing the envelope as an athlete to repair stuff, or if you're learning stuff, you're preparing for a big exam, you're going to need more sleep than usual. At least you won't feel the demand and you'll be able to outrun the urge to repay the debt by just putting in stimulants. But eventually, I mean, this is tea, green tea, and that's my favorite, but sometimes I'll have to go to caffeine. I try not to use caffeine because it's counterintuitive. You would think if you don't get enough sleep, and you feel totally run down, then you would figure, give me enough stimulants, I'll make it through the next day. But if you never pay back the REM and the slow wave sleep, the brain will not function properly. And that's what usually happens as we get older because 8 hours gets fragmented, which a lot of my patients, 30 to 50 years of age, even 60 to 70 years of age, will say, I wake up once a night. That could be okay. But if you're trying to repay that REM in the middle of the day with a 2-hour power nap, quote unquote power nap, that will serve for the immediate payback of your debt. But if you continue that, then the brain will say, wait a minute, I always crash at 2 or 3 p.m., so I'm going to make that part of my schedule. I'm going to wake this guy up middle of the night, and then in the afternoon when you're driving long distance, your brain's going to say, nope, I'm going to sleep, and you fall asleep driving home. And I honestly, it happened to me twice. Once during my first day of residency, driving home from University of Pennsylvania to my parents' house in Mount Laurel near Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And I don't remember. I fell asleep driving. I slammed into another car. I hit a neurologist, believe it or not. The second time it happened, I was presenting a paper or a presentation to my fellowship group for sports medicine. Did an all-nighter, thought I could power through it, but I had to drive from my place in Lombard, the apartment we were renting, to Chicago at DePaul University. Fell asleep driving. Sleeper performing actions while you're sleepy will be when your debt has to be paid back. And if it happens to be you driving a vehicle, or the Exxon Valdez, I believe the captain, that's one of the worst oil spills in the world, or the history of humanity. And the Exxon Valdez captain fell asleep, I believe, and that's what led to the crash. So it's worse than drinking alcohol, but bottom line is that your brain will ask you for payment, repayment back to fix the debt. So you can't go on forever, and you have to repay. I know a lot of athletes will, athletes and teachers will know how the performance goes in the human, because Monday morning athletics or training and Monday morning classes are usually more difficult to get through because of the weekend, the less sleep on the weekend and the partying and the all-nighters. Again, I wanted to espouse the value of sleep because a lot of my patients just avoid that lever. It's such a low lever to pull to make a change. So I would always try to initiate. I'll put a link down below to a video I did on unboxing a couple of supplements that do help. So if you're, again, I mentioned already that if you're taking in alcohol to get to sleep, that makes sense initially, but if you rely on that, then you'll, number one, become dependent on alcohol. Number two, alcohol usually at night will make you a little bit sleepy or help you with the anxiousness about getting to sleep, but the alcohol will wear off. So if you have your drinks or shots or nightcaps at 8 or 9, and to help you get to sleep, quote unquote, get to sleep, at about 1 or 2 a.m., the alcohol would have worn off if your liver is good, and then your brain is right where you left it at about 7:30. And the brain is wide awake and or with the anxiousness that you never took care of with your behavioral health practitioner, and then it'll wake you up. It won't be that you just wake up in a panic. It'll just be that your brain comes out of those slow wave sleeps and REM and the stages of sleep to go eat or to watch TV or to engage in conversation. That's not the right time. So you're not supposed to eat, so the gut's supposed to calm down and do its thing at night. You're not supposed to move, and that's the reason for us during REM becoming paralyzed. So let's talk about that. The first half of the night is slow wave sleep dominant, and usually if you have slow wave sleep, which is really responsible for avoiding dementia and helping with memory, well, that's usually dependent on how efficient your first half of sleep was. So if you have 8 hours, the first 4 hours of sleep. If it's efficient, it's quiet, it's cold, it's dark, it's not noisy, you have background noise, you're not grinding your teeth, you're not sleep apneic, your dog's not moving, then you have a good slow wave sleep 4 hours, assuming you have 8 hours of total sleep. The second half, if that first half was good, the second half opens up and you have an Easter egg too, REM. So REM usually is most dominant in the second half of sleep, so the last 4 hours of sleep, if it's not fragmented sleep and you're not waking up middle of the night. And REM is the beauty of REM is usually going to be, that's when you dream, that's also when muscle becomes paralyzed. So let me explain two things. Rapid eye movement is REM. That's the second half of sleep. And rapid eye movement occurs, which is really cool, because in brain tissue, real estate is always used properly. So what sometimes happens and has been proven, especially with the guys at Stanford, if you have an area of the brain that dies or becomes unused, then there'll be squatters, other nerve tissue that goes into that part of the brain to take over. It's a self-defense mechanism. So of the 5 senses, if you have, say, an area of the brain, let's just refer to the occiput, the vision center. So everybody knows that vision comes through the eyes, and you're interpreting your environment, and it's putting it back here in the occiput. That part of the brain is really big, and it's really important for visual acuity and complex colors and all that other stuff. Well, during sleep, this turns off because your eyes are closed. And if it turns off and there's no stimulation, theoretically during sleep, the brain might think you had a stroke and it's not working anymore, so it'll send these new neurons into the area to take over. It usually will be like with a person that's sighted or blinded by something or loses an eye. To preserve that area, other parts of the sensory nerves will come in and take over. And that's why I think the people that lose their vision become very acute with their sense of hearing, their sense of smell, their sense of touch. They'll become very acute. Think of the Tai Chi master who's blinded, but he can catch an arrow in the air because he can hear it. Well, that's because the brain noted no activity back here from the stroke and it took over. Now, think of that happening every night. The only way that you can stop the neurons from coming in to take squatter rights, I guess you can call it, is by turning on that area so that the brain doesn't think that it's gone. And how do you turn on this area while you're asleep? You move your eyes. That's what happens with rapid eye movement. Even if this is blinded, the eyes get to move. And usually during REM, rapid eye movement, the subject, the patient, the client will remember dreaming. And that's the beauty. And to protect you, because the eyes continue moving during your tennis match, if there's an example, the eyes continue moving, so do muscles. And if muscles were to move, you might actually walk away, walk off the cliff, fall into danger, walk down the steps. You might do that, but the self-defense mechanism is paralysis. So the brain tells itself that first half of sleep, if it's good, then it'll set up for the second half of sleep, which will be REM, where your immune system rebuilds, where your muscles actually repair, and then you start dreaming. And that's the beauty of the second half of sleep, is that during paralysis, this is my assumption, during paralysis, when your body is protecting you, it's protecting you by paralyzing you, and it's allowing REM to happen and your dreams start. Well, during paralysis, you have muscle repair. So those of you who exercise and you push the envelope, you go into a 1-rep max, you do your longest run or your longest ride, or you attack a 14,000-foot hill. The day after, you have to repair, and that's when, if your REM or second half of sleep is proper, you repair muscle faster. So just think of it this way too. If you've ever been a coach or had a kid that participated or competed, if they did not sleep well the night before because you had to drive to your event or fly to your event, the performance will be off, unless that person's really fine-tuned. And the performance will be off because the muscles did not get their rest that they demanded. In fact, if they didn't get the rest, the brain also feels weak and the muscles hurt. So if any of you move a lot at night or grind your teeth, that's actually a sleep disorder. And when you move a lot and grind your teeth, you don't get a break. So think of it this way: if you're supposed to have 4 hours of paralysis, and it doesn't mean you're going to be paralyzed the entire night, and you won't stop breathing, it's just muscles become very flaccid. You shortcut that, and then muscles are moving constantly, then not only did you exercise the day before, but you also are technically exercising the entire night, and the muscles don't get what the rest is that they demand. And then you wake up achy. So if you've ever known a fibromyalgia patient who has a sleep disorder, they always end up achy, and the trigger points are 11 of 18 are hot. They can't think. Their mood is totally off. In fact, that's what happens. Is it's been noted that with poor sleep, your perception of pain will be intense, higher, easier to trigger, and then your perceived exertion will be higher. So those of you who train or exercise, that means that you actually hit your plateau, your psychological plateau faster. So those of you who are on point, you're in the zone, night's sleep, you can push past your boundaries and max out, get your best PR. But if you don't get any sleep, there's no way, because the brain's perceived exertion is a lot lower, I guess you could say. So it's like, oh, I'm not going to do this, or I can't hit that PR, forget it, I'm not going to break the tape. You just have these pervasive thoughts, and then you quit. You tap out, and that's because of poor sleep. It's kind of cool for me. And finally, the other thing too I wanted to mention is that there's things that you should avoid. Caffeine after, believe it or not, you're not supposed to take caffeine 12 hours before sleep. So if you I get ready for bed at 8:30, go to sleep at 9. I know that's old man stuff, but I also wake up at 4. I use this device, and it kind of tells me that I had a good night's sleep, or it kind of measures some of the things that I can't feel. You can go by seat of your pants. Did I sleep well? By just gauging it, or you can go by this, which it can get some good data. It's not as good as a sleep study in a lab, but it uses pulse ox and movement to kind of figure, okay, what was the pattern? And the beauty of wearing a wearable device is that you can get a pattern. You can establish a regular pattern, even if it's not that accurate, but then you implement a change and you repeat the measurements to see if the pattern changes to a positive level. Again, sometimes some of you are very sensitive, so you can feel that on your own. But sometimes you get so many distractions, it's hard to feel improvement to see if whatever you implemented will work, that you need the fine-tuning of this. So this is a Garmin Epix Generation 2. This is an Apple old school. But you can use both, or you can use a Fitbit. As long as it's not too expensive. Or you can use blood testing, but it's just sequentially really hard to do it that way. Avoiding caffeine 12 hours before you sleep, although it might help you, but again, to get to an endpoint, you might have to use it, but then you have to get off of it. I used to love coffee. I still do coffee just to get into Panera Bread, but I will rely more on green tea, which has antioxidants, e.g. CG, L-theanine, and has less caffeine than coffee. Chop that down if you can as far as coffee intake or caffeine intake. Also, try to get rid of the alcohol. One of the things I'm doing with my faith is that I'm going through something called Exodus 90. And Exodus 90 is 90 days of abstaining from stuff and cold showers. So you have to abstain from alcohol, watching TV, buying frivolous things. You have to start a fraternity with other men. Sorry, it's only for men. It was developed by seminarians. You have to avoid snacks. All these things are great just to reset your cycle, because a lot of us are so embedded in watching videos, watching it late at night, especially if it's boring, and or you wake up middle of the night, can't get back to sleep, you turn on a video. It's easy. I wouldn't do that. The eyes will know. And if they sense blue light or light, period, they will get stimulated. And what happens with brain stimulation is that you break your cycles. You break your cycles of sleep. Go from 1, 2, 3, which is non-REM, and then slow wave. And then it goes into REM, and it goes back up. So it takes about 60 to 90 minutes, sometimes 100 minutes to get through an entire cycle. Go through the stages, REM. Go through the stages, REM. If you have 8 of those per night, perfect. Not all of us are perfect, depending on our medicines. And that's the last thing I'll mention, is that sometimes medicines that help you during the day will harm you at night. So side effects can usually be interruption of sleep or making you sleepy during the day. You take a nap during the day, and then the brain says, well, I napped, I don't have to go to sleep. And then you set yourself up for bad rhythm. Or you don't exercise. So again, I can't do too much as far as ranting today, as far as timing of exercise, type of exercise, but if you become a subscriber, you'll see what I'm talking about. But that's it in a nutshell. And one more thing before I let you guys go that I always thought was really cool was, if you have a mood disorder and you have lack of those hormones, serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, oxytocin, if you're lacking those things, sometimes by taking medicines you can get those levels up, but they are probably temporary, and you have to fix whatever lifestyle abnormality you have so that you can get off the medicines. That's my ideal. Some people are really dug down deep with medical problems and it's too hard and you might need medicines, but you can get medicines. And you can also get TMS, which will be a video I'm going to do soon. TMS is transmagnetic stimulation, cranial stimulation. So TMS is helpful for balancing out the brain. And this is my last thing I'll talk about because I think it's just cool. During slow wave sleep, and those stages that lead to REM and then the repeat of those, the whole cycle over and over again, the brain goes through slow waves. During the day, it's going through fast waves, thinking, problem solving, so it's almost like mini seizures happening everywhere. During slow wave sleep, the entire brain goes through this rhythm, and it's almost like a slow seizure. Seizures happen when a focus of an impulse starts in one area and it doesn't get stopped, and it propagates all throughout the entire brain, and it causes you to shake and then lose consciousness. That's not good. But sometimes during sleep, the stages will go through these slow spikes of electricity, and the electricity will gently move in one direction. And in the brain, there's these things called ventricles, these spaces that produce fluid, and it comes from blood vessels. And the fluid is supposed to wash the brain and bring white blood cells to take care of scarring and eating up bad stuff, taking care of infection. Well, when that slow wave sleep propagates forward, for example, one direction, you see slow wave sleep, you see the impulse and then a rest, and then the impulse and then a rest. What happens with that electrical movement is you actually cause a vascular pump to occur. So with the slow waves, this push of fluid occurs in the brain, and the fluid brings white blood cells. The white blood cells eat all the crap that, as far as ideas and bad memories and toxins in your body or inflammation, all the crap that is trying to settle in the brain. And then those are called dendrites, astrocytes, and they eat that up and they keep the brain clean from these things called plaques or neurofibrillary tangles. Where do you find them? Alzheimer's disease. So if you get good sleep, you can actually beat Alzheimer's disease. I mean, even if you have genetics that say you're going to have an Alzheimer's attack, the ApoE4 gene, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. But if you screw up your sleep and ignore sleep and don't do it, or if your provider doesn't do anything to help you with your sleep, you're going to get to Alzheimer's disease fast. And those of you who are diabetics, Alzheimer's disease is considered diabetes type 3. So if you don't take care of your diabetes, if you bastardize your sleep, you're getting to that point fast. If you embrace sleep, if you take care of your diabetes, if you take care of exercise, you'll push back Alzheimer's disease to hopefully 100 years of age, in addition to all the other medical problems. So hopefully this gives you a basic idea of the coolness of this brain and the importance of the stages of sleep. And a lot of the sleep is dependent on a lot of the day. So if you're screwed up in the day, maybe that'll be my next rant tomorrow. What should you be doing during the day, and how do you use your day to help your sleep? In fact, I think I'll do that, in addition to the wearable devices and that TMS video. So please consider subscribing. Hopefully this gives you a couple of footholds to improve your medical problem. If you have any questions, put them in the comments section down below, and pass this on to people that you know, relatives or friends or colleagues that might need a little bit of understanding about what they're doing or what they're avoiding fixing. And I'll see you at the next video. Stay healthy.